Hello and welcome to the Commonweal Policy Podcast. I'm Craig Dalzell, I'm the Head of Policy and Research at Commonweal, and today I'm very delighted to say is another guest episode of the podcast. I have two guests with me that I'll be talking to today, both from Scotland's Climate Assembly, who just published their interim report on what Scotland needs to do to avert the climate emergency. I have today Ian Stewart, who is the lead communicator of the Assembly, and I have Ellie Clark, who was one of the members of the Assembly. Hello to both of you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So this was Scotland's second Citizens' Assembly. It's a relatively new idea in the world of democracy about how we can get people to engage with politics and policies. And it was really kind of pioneered in Ireland a few years ago, but it started to come into Scotland. The first Citizens' Assembly was last year and had a very general, broad purpose. Its question was really how to make Scotland better. And we talked about this on the policy podcast at the time. But this second assembly, the Climate Assembly, is much more focused and really looks at what Scotland needs to do to respond to this climate emergency. So Ian, how did this assembly come about, and really what makes it different from other kinds of political engagement with the public, like consultations or focus groups?
Well, I mean, formally it came out of the Climate Change Act. So as part of the Climate Change Act, I think it was the Greens that included the statement that there had to be a Citizens' Assembly, which, as you say, had come out of Ireland. There was one about abortion in Ireland, and then I think there was a climate change one, but it was a new thing. This is, you mentioned it's not the first one it's got, but what it is the first one in the world to be online, because of course COVID it comes in and messes up the plans for it to be a more conventional one. So there's been a lot of eyes of the world on this particular one to see, how does it work, and is it more inclusive and more how could it work with participatory if you've got a bank of screens that people are faced with rather than that face-to-face interaction. So in terms of the formalities of it, it's been running really over the last 6 months. It's 6 weekends originally, and we asked the members if they wanted a seventh. It was always an option. They chose that. So 7 weekends, spaced once a month, roughly every few weeks, hearing evidence around the climate emergency, the question that we had, because of course there was a UK Climate Assembly, which was very much directed at how addressing the net zero question. How do we reach net zero? The Scottish one took a different, more open question, which is how do we tackle the climate emergency in a fair and effective way? So that was much broader, and yet we'd actually less time to discuss it in. So the balancing act for me, because I was chair of the evidence group, was what is the key information that people like Ellie needed to know, to have in front of them, to actually be able to have sensible conversations about this. So because we wanted space for them to have lots and lots of discussion. That's the whole point of a citizens' assembly. But at the same time, there had to be some foundational knowledge, as we refer to it. So up front was probably more, and then as the weekends went through, it kind of tailed away, and until the end, really, it was virtually, full on 100% citizen discussion. So, but that's a kind of potted version of it, really.
So, Ian, just for folk who aren't maybe that aware of what a citizens' assembly is, can you tell us about the process of how people were chosen to come onto the assembly?
Yeah. Well, different assemblies have different ways to do it, but they all are trying to get at a demographically representative sample of people, which typically for big assemblies is about 100 people. But in some cases, some of them can be as small as 30. But ours was over 100 people. So representative of Scotland, a mini Scotland is a kind of phrase. So, in terms of gender, in terms of disability, in terms of income, in terms of their views on climate change. So that was it's called Sorption, and there was a separate group that went out and hunted down these 100 people. And then they became out, their letters went out, inviting them out to lots of people. They were invited to apply, and 100 were selected on the basis of this demographic representation. So it's as close as we can get to try and make sure we've got as many different walks of life and inputs and perspectives into the whole situation. And then the idea is that people, what was it referred to as slow food politics, you know, to sort of sit down and discuss and get into the detail and hear people's conflicting viewpoints and work through them, you know. And it's such a rarity in the present fast food political climate to be able to do that. So they are pretty extraordinary vehicles for democratic deliberation.
Slow food and fast food politics. I hadn't heard that one before. I like it. So, Ellie, as one of Scotland's representative people, can you tell us about your story, your side of this, your reaction when that letter came through the door, and why you chose to respond to it?
Yeah, well, I was actually just about to move house, and I was just collecting the last bits of mail that were left on the doorstep, and one of the letters was from about the Climate Assembly and inviting me to kind of apply. And I think it said in the letter, if I remember correctly, I think 22,000 letters were sent around the country, and they were looking for a pool of about 100. So I kind of thought my chances were quite slim, but I thought, well, I think it announced the question that Ian has already mentioned about how we were going to look at how Scotland can change to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way. And it really resonated for me. And I had heard a little bit about climate assemblies before, but I wasn't really sure how they worked. I think it was through following some of the Green Party activity that I'd heard about it and was intrigued, and then I applied, and then I moved house, and then I got a phone call and heard that I'd been shortlisted for the 100 plus people. So I felt really and yeah, I mean, just to be invited to be kind of representative of the voice of Scotland, I think it's a real honour. And I think a lot of the members, speaking to them, we all felt like we didn't take that lightly. We really felt like, you know, that was something that we needed to take seriously and speak on behalf of the whole of Scotland.
Yeah, I've often heard folk who have been involved in this process treating it with the same kind of weight as you would say jury duty, that kind of citizen's responsibility. So, can you both tell me, you know, about the discussion process over those weeks as you did it? I mean, how was that evidence presented, and how was it received by the Assembly?
Well, I'll start by what the plan was, and Ellie can talk about what actually whether that plan worked. So I said before, it was this balancing act. So we wanted to make sure that there was lots of different viewpoints and lots of different perspectives, because some of the stuff gets very technical. Actually, we didn't spend a lot of time on the climate science. I think I had to do the climate science in 2 10-minute sessions in weekend 1 or something like that, you know. So we wanted to get onto the issues, the potential solutions, and all the rest of it. So almost all the material was delivered with short video presentations that people had pre-made, which meant that it meant that we could keep the time, and time was critical because we had 4 hours on a Saturday and 4 hours on a Sunday, and there obviously had to be lots of time for the members themselves to discuss. So we had to keep them really tight. That material then also went onto the web page and the portal so that people could look at it in their own time later, you know, outside of the assembly. And it was, I say, so what kind of evidence were people going to hear? Who were they going to hear from? What were these different views? And then setting up the schedule. And as I say, front loaded, so that weekends 1 and 2 was quite heavy in terms of foundational knowledge. And also importantly about things like what does fairness mean? You know, what are principles that we're going to look at? How do we engage in these kind of debates? What are the rules of engagement? There was quite a lot of that getting set up. And then a lot of the stuff around making people think deeper beneath the surface around what is effective change, how do systems change, rather than making sure we weren't just picking superficial things around technology or certain things. So there was a lot of effort gone into that. I was really stressing as well that it had to be fun and engaging. You know, I know Ellie and, you know, the colleagues had set themselves up for this. They've agreed to this, but also it had to be something enjoyable, because if you enjoyed participating in it, you were going to contribute far more than it being a real chore to do. So that was the plan. But I guess over to Ellie to find out to what extent how that actually was received at the other end.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think it was a very effective way of kind of upskilling the group and informing them to give the knowledge that we needed to make the right decisions and hold the right kind of discussions. I thought I knew quite a bit about climate emergency and the climate science before, but I realized how much up-to-date information I was missing. And I really appreciated all the way it was given to us in the presentations, the videos. They were kind of the right length so you could concentrate, and there was a lot of information, but then we had breakout groups where we could have smaller discussions. And then I really liked the opportunity to invite experts back into discussions. So that was really useful. And speaking to other members, I think everyone generally felt like we'd been on this incredible journey of knowledge and understanding. And I think at the end, we all just felt like the whole of Scotland needed to have this knowledge too. And it's kind of almost like a right that we need to have this knowledge to be kind of climate resilient and make the right decisions and be able to kind of progress and evolve and change in the ways and adapt in the ways that we need to in this current emergency that we're in. I was impressed with the way it was conducted. So well done, Ian, and your team.
Well, I mean, it was a huge. I mean, we had the same facilitators that had facilitated in the UK Climate Assembly, and we really learned from let's say not mistakes so much, but things that they'd done that they wished they'd done differently, and we were able to do that. I know there was a long, big learning curve around the online bit, but actually one of the things that we found was, and I certainly found this, that it was almost better, because in those little breakout groups, people didn't have to travel to get to places. There was that was literally they were in their own house with their own cup of tea. People were in a much more relaxed mode. It was, and it meant that people and the facilitators were very good, because we would drop in and if we were needed, it teasing out people who were a little bit shy, or who felt, maybe in the group, and this would, Ellie, I'm sure we had lots of times when there was somebody quite dominant who actually thought they knew something about something and held court. And actually allowing other quieter voices to come through. And I thought that was really interesting. And in a face-to-face venue, I'm not sure. I think those loud voices, mainly guys actually, but anyway, loud voices would probably still have dominated. So I thought I quite liked that format.
The value of a good chair in these discussions is incalculable.
Yeah, I definitely felt the facilitators were really skilled in the way that they allowed space for everyone to voice their ideas. And I know there's a couple of members in particular who I think really found the whole process quite enlightening and empowering for them to feel like they have a platform for being able to speak out.
Yeah, so the other thing that's interesting is that because it was demographically representative, some of the people didn't believe in climate change, were skeptical, contrarian. Some of the people thought it was a scam that the government had brought in just to taxes and didn't like taxes. I remember getting pulled into one conversation when someone said, "Why are you not talking about X?" Maybe I think it was fish farming. Is it because big business doesn't want you to talk about it? And
so Ellie, through those discussions, did you find that an interesting process, just sort of meeting people who were coming from very different perspectives or very different, personal places and circumstances from you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because each time we met up, and there were 5 weekends, like 7 weekends over 5 months, and you did get to meet quite a lot of people, and like each day you'd have like different kind of breakout groups and facilitators, and then you'd re-meet those people again, and you kind of were aware that you were going on this journey collectively, and I felt like it was quite uniting. And I really felt like at the end it was kind of like one voice, and where perhaps people were disagreeing on kind of priorities to begin with, I kind of felt like there was more of a synergy of people aligning with similar kind of ideas of the route that we should be going. So the whole kind of personal thing of like seeing in people's homes, and you can, it's a wide range of people with different circumstances, and it was really nice, like introducing yourself each at the start of each session and finding out where everyone was located across the country.
And did you ever have Hugh, Ellie, in your group? Hugh, who was the first time he'd ever used a computer.
Oh, really? Well, I had Jim in a couple of my sessions, and he was totally new to technology as well. But yeah, that people were doing so great with, and I think the assembly coordinators had really helped people with technology the whole time. So you kind of, it was in and out for me with my bandwidth sometimes, but I felt really supported, and it was a good process.
Yeah. And I suppose I should put in my own little perspective on engagement with the assembly, because I was indeed one of the experts that was brought in on I think week 4, and I think it was either week 6 or week 7. And from my perspective, we had a lot of the experts sitting behind the scenes in this little green room chatting to each other while the assembly was deliberating, and then one of us would just get plucked out from time to time to go and answer a question. We wouldn't know where we were going, what kind of conversation we were dropping into, and we'd be hit with, sometimes quite technical questions, and you'd be given a couple of minutes to try and answer it before you'd be whisked away and thrown into another group. It was invigorating. I loved it. I thrive on that kind of hot seat type questioning. So it was a lot of fun.
The other thing about, we were trying to say this across to the members, I'm not sure if Ellie and colleagues believed us really, but actually the breadth of knowledge that they ended up with is far in excess of anything that most of our experts had, because experts are experts because they know a narrow area really well, and that's what they come to talk about. So if you know about standards of passive house, new house builds, you probably don't know that much about meat production and things like that. And yet the assembly members didn't have that opportunity. You pretty much had to be broad. So often, you would be coming into something, and it would be bonkers, the question, or you'd think, where's that come from? But that's the topic that had emerged from this amazing discussion, and you had to try and answer it or get someone else in that could do it. So I thought it was fantastic fun, I have to say.
Yeah, I have to say that the quality of the questions that I got was great throughout. It was really interesting to see some of the ideas that were going into what was going to become the final report, which does actually bring us on to the publication that has come out today as we're recording this, the interim report for the Climate Assembly, because this is the last day of the Scottish Parliament before it breaks up before the elections. The Assembly wanted to get some of its initial thoughts out, although there's going to be a more full report coming out, I believe, in May, certainly after the elections, when the new Parliament convenes. So, Ian, can you just tell us a bit about what is in that report, what it says, and I will link to the report in the description of the podcast.
Well, I'll say some general things, and maybe Ellie can pick up on some of because it's there. I mean, the key thing is it's the members' report, in the sense that we took the text that was coming out of the various groups and put that together, but then that was relayed back to the members, and the members could work on it and improve it, and there were votes and about words changing, quite a few important little additions. So it really is the membership one. So there was a couple of things around, for example, some basic principles around fairness that I think are really interesting. So when we talked about what is going to be fair, a key thing here is this notion of that it was going to be, there wasn't one size fit all. So I guess the headline is urgent action. So this is real, this is happening now, and we have to, all parts of society, this is a kind of societal reset. Yep. So government, business, communities, individuals, we all have responsibility to do some, and we have to start now. So that was the absolutely clear and largely unequivocal voice of the Assembly. But within that, there was some of the priority around fairness was the notion that there wasn't just one size fits all that could be applied across Scotland. Different communities would have different needs. And this idea of fairness came through, that the highest emitters that were the biggest problem, and they should take the biggest hits as well. So that, but on the other side of fairness, the other bit that I kind of like, the least priority was put the people of Scotland first. And I thought that was really interesting. You know, normally there's this nationalism about making sure we're number one and looked after. This was, I think, a recognition that we're global citizens. This is a global problem, and we need global responsibility. So there's a number of different aspects that come in terms of specific goals, and then underneath that, there's a whole raft of different recommendations that the full report in May will come out with. But I might hand over to Ellie to pick up some of her thoughts on some of the key goals, the way that she sees them. And I can dip in if there's other bits that
yeah. Well, I have to say I was really proud to see our word for word like introductory statement published in the Scotsman this week, and it really was like word for word. And I wasn't sure when I first embarked on the Assembly whether we would be really getting down to the nitty-gritty and the wording of what was going to be pitched as our recommendations in the document. I thought maybe there'd be the wordsmithing and things would all be done externally, but it really is kind of all the recommendations down to like each word practically that has been submitted. So it really feels like a sense of kind of ownership over the entirety of what we've proposed to Scottish Parliament. And yeah, it's I don't know, I think it will be interesting to see what their response is in the next 6 months, but that's the kind of the preliminary report has gone in. So
I've got the thing here. I mean maybe if I say some of the, because of course they get different levels of support amongst the membership, and so the kind of top line ones, the goals, if I just say, so something gets 97% of support is resources, reduce consumption and waste by embracing society-wide resource management. That was 97. Another one at 97 was passive house. This is the highest quality of building standards, talking about, you know, trying to build Scottish new builds to that level.
I think I was quite strong on promoting that one personally.
Well, I think you might have been great. And then there was stuff around retrofitting homes, making sure that, now this is the interesting bit, you know, that Scotland will be a leader in retrofit technology. And I think that's the other thing that members brought out, is there were real benefits here. It could be health benefits for the diet, or it could be industrial benefits from being a leader in developing these new technologies. So it wasn't all about sackcloth and flagellating ourselves because we're being nasty to the planet. There was a real focus on, this is happening, the world is changing, and Scotland, if it's nimble enough, can get ahead of the curve and do it. And yeah, I couldn't, anything else, Ellie, from you, but what stuck in your mind from your perspective that you were pleased to see?
To back up what you were saying, I feel like there are lots of opportunities that are coming out of the urgency and the climate emergency, and it doesn't need to all be sacrifices. So, for example, one of my favourite goals or recommendations that we reported is moving away from a national focus on the vision of Scotland's future being measured by GDP, and looking at prioritising more like person and community-centred vision for a thriving people's communities and climate. So I feel like there's like real benefits that can come from the situation, and if we adapt and change in a fair and effective way, it can be positive to everybody and the climate and environment, biodiversity, and so I thought that comes through in a lot of the goals that there's 16 of them altogether.
Yeah, I have to say that was one thing that really kind of I was quite enthusiastic to see in the interim report was the need for this to be a solution from all levels, not just the individual side of things. This isn't just about us trying to shop a little better to fix things. This does need to be community scale effort. It needs to be national scale effort as well.
It's a good point. Sorry, on you go.
Yeah, and you're right, Ian. Again, this isn't about self-flagellation and sacrifice either. This was a point again I tried to make when I was giving my evidence to the Assembly. A lot of the changes that we could make are genuinely for the better, and we should probably do them regardless of the climate emergency.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, you know, what this group has done that I haven't seen elsewhere is recognise that all society approach. So the way it normally works is that individuals will look to government and business and say, we are powerless, they've got all the control, until they make their decisions, we can't do anything. And then business and government pass the buck to individuals to say, well, look, until our customers decide they want change, or until the voters decide they want change, we can't move. And you end up stuck in the middle. So this notion that actually there are these different levels, and each of the levels can, so there are things as individuals we can change, and that those changes in behaviours might have effect. But the big effect is giving the people up the food chain the courage to do what they need to do, you know. And this really is a mandate, a manifesto for everyone starting at the level they can, companies, governments, and individuals and communities, to do their bit. And I get that sense of acceleration, you know, that they'll feed off of each other and it will kind of collectively drive forward. Maybe I'm just being an eternal optimist there, but I think that's the sense of what comes through reading the goals, is that this is a time for action.
So what are the next steps for the Assembly in this report? We mentioned the full report is coming out, but what is it going to build on that isn't in the interim report?
I think one of the, so formally the full report goes in May, and it'll be, I can't remember how many, and you might remember, Ellie, how many recommendations, a lot of specific recommendations, some with timescales, some with levels of urgencies, some very specific, some very general. I think what that's going to do is there'll be things missing, you know, people will look in this and be disappointed because they're, oh, there's nothing on X, or why is this not done? That then is going to give a platform to people really starting to engage in conversations around this. Formally, the Scottish Government have to report back within 6 months of the full report in May, which means they're going to be reporting back in the shadow of COP, when the UK government's running COP in Glasgow. So I think that, again, this was something come up quite early on amongst some of the members saying, oh, the politicians will never answer us. I think they will. This will be sitting on the top desk in the run-up when the whole world's spotlight's on Scotland. And I think they'll want to see these really quite courageous recommendations, at least moving them forward. I think there's a broader discussion, and Ellie might want to talk to that, about what we've had this amazing assembly, and we get this great resource of material and people. Well, what do we do with the Ellies of this world now? You know, we've done all this, you've gone through this. Can we use that to push forward in other fronts? And I don't know, Ellie, if you've got any thoughts about that. Now you've been back into normal life. You know?
Yeah, there were some final discussions in the past weekend with some other members, and kind of a feeling of concern, you know, what's going to happen now that we've handed this over? We've worked really hard for 5 months, and we feel kind of really kind of emotionally tied to these recommendations, and we really feel strongly about them, and whether, how much are they actually going to be kind of looked into, taken on board, and is there a way that we could, the force of these 100+ people as members, do we have standing that we can form a kind of, not a watchdog, but, you know, just oversee and hold the Parliament accountable for keeping to, I mean, they did sign, it's a promise to, you know, to assign us to do this in the first place and to take on board our recommendations, but how much will they really, and listen to the kind of the time scale and the targets that we've specified in there.
And say, as a political lobbyist, that when a politician does announce that they're picking up your ideas, it is a really nice feeling, especially if you've been fighting for it for a long time or putting a lot of passion into it. What about the Citizens' Assembly model in general? Do you think there's scope to do this for other topics, or to have, you know, broader or narrower focuses on various policies? We've even seen from the previous Citizens' Assembly in Scotland that there was a call for a permanent House of Citizens, using this model as an alternative to the House of Lords, or as a second house for the Scottish Parliament. Is this something you could see happening?
I'll let Ellie answer that one. Go for it.
I think it's a great model for really giving a platform and a voice to the nation without kind of bypassing politics and being held back by different constraints of party politics and kind of almost kind of overriding that or running alongside. And I kind of almost feel like, yeah, the Climate Assembly needs to continue to it's such a priority, but then I can see it being applied to different subjects and different policies where you can upskill a group of people that represent the nation and they have a strong voice and they're representatives, so the politicians should really listen.
And the only thing I'd add in is that, one of the things that came through from the experts, and I keep saying expert, but the evidence group folks, was this level of discussion of detail, we don't even have in the universities. We don't, in a lot of the conference we go to, the so-called, it just doesn't happen. And so as a model, I think it can work in a whole bunch of ways. I'd love to see us, even in the universities, saying, what are we about as a university? And you might have a citizens assembly of the staff and, the professional staff and the academic staff and the students actually trying to work that out. I think it could work in a lot of companies, and it's just such a liberating way to work.
Very final question for Ellie: if the letter came through your door again, would you open it, and would you do this again? Would you apply to be part of a future citizens assembly?
Yes, I would, and I'd encourage anyone else to do it too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ellie and Ian, for coming onto the podcast and having this chat. It's been a brilliant discussion. Just to round up the podcast, just to remind everyone who's listening, Commonweal as an organisation, we are entirely funded by our listeners, by folk like yourselves who give us an average of £10 a month as a donation. So if anyone wants to support the podcast or support the policy work that we do, we greatly appreciate all of your support. Thank you again to my guests, and just to say that next week is going to be another guest interview where we will be talking about land reform and what Scotland's uplands could look like after the Green New Deal. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.